Here begins tape number 1 in the videotape deposition of Bryan Pagliano in the matter of Judicial Watch Incorporated versus the U.S. Department of State in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. Case number 13-CV-1363. Today's date is June 22nd, 2016. The time on the video monitor is 9:31. The videographer today is Jeremy Deneen, representing Planet Depots. This video deposition is taking place at Planet Depots, 1100 Connecticut Avenue Northwest in Washington, D.C.
So there may be objections that your attorneys or other attorneys in the room may state for the record. Unless your attorney is instructing you not to answer, you must still answer the question, okay?
Yes.
Okay. And finally, you've been sworn in. You understand that your testimony is taken under oath? Is there any reason why you would not be able to truthfully answer the questions being asked today?
Objection. Outside the scope of permissible discovery, the witness is instructed not to answer.
Whether there's any reason he can't answer the questions truthfully?
I am not going to debate that with you. The witness has been instructed not to answer. Ask your next question.
Okay. Mr. Pagliano, are you currently employed, and if so, where?
Objection. Outside the scope of permissible discovery, the witness is instructed not to answer.
Could you mark this as Exhibit 1? Mr. Pagliano, have you reviewed what's been marked as Exhibit 1?
Ms. Kotka, I will represent you. The witness has, because the subpoena was served on us. The witness has reviewed it and understands it and has discussed it with counsel. Okay,
well, I'll need the witness to answer and to tell me rather than his attorney.
It is outside the scope of permissible discovery. I've given you the information you need. We've accepted it as a service on his behalf, and I've made the representation to you.
Mr. Pagliano, have you seen this document before here today?
Same. Objection. That is outside the scope of discovery. Instruct the witness not to answer.
This is a subpoena for his testimony here today for the discovery being taken. I don't know how that can be outside the scope of discovery. You've instructed your witness not to answer?
What is your next question?
Other than this document, Mr. Pagliano, have you reviewed any other documents in preparation for today's deposition?
Outside the scope of permissible discovery, the witness is instructed not to answer.
I'm asking for purposes of preparing for his deposition that has been granted by the court for purposes of discovery taken in this case if he has reviewed any other documents. I don't see how that's outside of scope of the discovery in this case.
Not here to debate that with you, Ms. Kotka. The witness has been advised and the objection is on record.
For scope, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Pagliano, are you following your counsel's advice and not answering the question?
Objection. For privilege and numerous other reasons, that's outside the scope of discovery, and he is instructed not to answer the question.
And I'm asking if he's refusing to answer the question. Mr. Pagliano, you may answer the question unless your client...
He's been instructed not to answer, and you can't instruct him otherwise.
When did your employment for the State Department begin, Mr. Pagliano?
On the advice of counsel, I will decline to answer your question in reliance on my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution.
During your tenure at the State Department, did you oversee the operation and maintenance of the ClintonEmail.com email system and server?
Objection, compound.
You may answer.
On advice of counsel, I will decline to answer your question in reliance on my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution.
Who paid you in relation to your work that you did in connection with either setting up or operating the ClintonEmail.com system prior to your employment at the State Department in May 2009?
On advice of counsel, I will decline to answer your question in reliance on my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution.
Do you have any knowledge about staff having raised concerns about Secretary Clinton using the email account with the domain ClintonEmail.com for government business?
On advice of counsel, I will decline to answer your question in reliance on my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution.
Did Secretary Clinton ever raise concerns about preservation of federal records on the ClintonEmail.com system with respect to pending Freedom of Information Act requests or litigation?
Objection, foundation.
On advice of counsel, I will decline to answer your question in reliance on my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution.
If you know, was the ClintonEmail.com system created to thwart the Freedom of Information Act?
On advice of counsel, I will decline to answer your question in reliance on my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution.
Do you know if the Secretary ever deleted any of her government emails on the Clinton.com email system?
On advice of counsel, I will decline to answer your question in reliance on my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution.
Were you ever asked to access the ClintonEmail.com system and delete any government emails during your tenure at the State Department?
On the advice of counsel, I will decline to answer your question in reliance on my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution.
Since February 2013, have you worked for the Clintons?
Objection beyond the scope of authorized discovery.
The witness is instructed not to answer.
On what basis?
Outside the scope of the court's order.
Are you working for the Clintons now?
Objection beyond the scope of authorized discovery.
The witness is instructed not to answer. The question is outside the scope of the court's order.
Since 2013, have you had any discussions with Ms. Abedin about the setup of the server?
Objection asked and answered.
You may answer.
On advice of counsel, I will decline to answer your question in reliance on my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution.
Since February 2013, have you discussed the setup of the server with any of the representatives of the Clintons?
Objection vague.
On advice of counsel, I will decline to answer your question in reliance on my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution.
Who's paying your legal bills for your representation in this action?
Objection, privileged.
Objection.
And outside the scope of the court's order.
Objection outside the scope of permissible discovery.
Are you familiar with the term hot wash?
On the advice of counsel, I will decline to answer your question in reliance on my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution.
Are you familiar with the hot wash being done with respect to the Clinton server?
On the advice of counsel, I will decline to answer your question in reliance on my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution.
That's all we have. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
This ends the deposition of Bryan Pagliano. We are off the record at 10:50.
Congratulations.
Here's your graduation present.
So what for? I got pinched.
Everybody gets pinched, but you did it right. You told them nothing, and they got nothing.
I thought you'd be mad.
Man, I'm not mad. I'm proud of you. You took your first pinch like a man, and you learned the two greatest things in life.
Well,
Look at me. Never rat on your friends, and always keep your mouth shut.
Hey, here he is, here he is.
Oh, you broke your cherry.